Hello, how are you? We are going to deal with lesson 6, and lesson 6 is about the evaluation and implementation of the strategy. Okay, so first of all, let us remind the agenda for this lesson. We are going to deal with the process of evaluation and choice. So first of all, we have to choose a strategy, and then we are going to think or to have some reflections about the implementation of the strategy, how to put it into practice. Finally, we are going to study the organizational change, the process of organizational change. But let us start reminding where we are, okay? If you remember, this is the strategy process. We started with setting the mission, the vision, and the strategic goals of a firm. Then we went into external and internal analysis in order to know which are the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats for a firm. After that, if you remember, we have dealt with some lessons about the competitive strategy and the corporate strategy of the firm in order to formulate strategic alternatives that could be adequate for the situation, for the internal and external context. Now we are coming to the choice, to the strategic choice. We have to choose the strategy we are going to put into practice. And then there are going to be more lessons about strategic implementation, how to put them into practice. We are going to start with the implementation today too, but now we are in the strategic choice. So strategic choice means choosing. That's obvious. I mean, selecting a strategic alternative amongst the different ones we have got in order to put it into practice, in order to implement it. Okay? So, why is it so critical? First of all, once you have chosen a strategy and you put it into practice, it is really difficult to get back. You can change the strategy, but you are not changing the strategy of a company 1 month, then the next month, and next month. No, this is far from possible, okay? And as I said, this is the starting point of the implementation of the strategy. You choose in order to put into practice. You don't choose a strategy in order to contemplate it, okay? Strategic choice is not easy because we are choosing a strategic course for the firm. We are choosing a strategy. And if you remember, when strategizing, strategic decisions were different from tactic decisions because they are not made every day. They are not taken normally, okay? So, in fact, they are highly uncertain. We don't normally know how they are going to come out, okay? So in fact, sometimes we will choose an adequate strategic alternative and then the result is not going to be as expected. This is a problem, but this can happen, okay? So this increases the complexity of the decision. The strategic decisions are complex. Why? Well, if we are making a competitive strategy decision, for instance, we are going to let us say, compete using a cost leadership strategy. This will affect all the areas of a firm. This will affect the finances of the firm. I mean, we need cheap money. This is going to affect the production of the firm. We need an efficient production. This is going to affect the marketing of the firm. So these decisions are complex. Some factors may reduce rationality. If I go back to the first lesson of the first term, I mean Strategic Management 1, Lesson 1, okay, to the very beginning, if you remember, there are different factors that can reduce the rationality of strategic decisions. Which were? Well, the limited rationality of the decisors. I mean, the people who decide don't know all the alternatives, and even if they know them, they cannot beforehand rate them easily and so on. Okay, so the limited rationality of decisions, the influence of past decisions. Sometimes we don't want to create a joint venture because we had a joint venture in the past and the results were horrible. So in fact, this past situation is reducing our rationality because it's not that joint ventures never work, it's that one joint venture, our one, didn't work. Okay, what else? Political influences from the stakeholders. We are going to deal with them immediately, okay? Also, the use of intuition. There are sometimes that decisors, well, do things just because. I mean, no, I think this is going to happen this way, so I am going to do that. Even in firms, it happens like that, okay? Especially the presence of stakeholders may be a limit to rationality. There could be interest conflicts between different stakeholders whenever we are choosing a strategic course, a strategic alternative. And as I said, we are going to get a bit deeper into that. So this process, this complex process, has got three main steps. Well, first of all, we have got many or some strategic alternatives. We are going to study the strategic suitability. If they should what? If they fit the strategic analysis of the firm, the internal and the external analysis. Then a few less strategic alternatives will survive this analysis. There are less suitable alternatives. Well, then we are going to study feasibility. Do we have the resources and capabilities to implement the strategy, and is our organization adequate to implement the strategy? Okay, then we have got suitable and feasible alternatives, which are less. Okay, are they acceptable? Are they acceptable for whom? For the different stakeholders of the company. Stakeholders considering obviously the shareholders, but any other critical stakeholders of the firm. Okay? If after this we come out with just one strategic alternative, that's great. This is our strategy. No problem. Imagine that we come out with many strategic alternatives, with 3. Okay, then we must rate them using the different criteria we have considered, classify them, and choose the right one. Imagine that we come out with no alternative which is suitable, feasible, and acceptable. Well, we have a problem. We have a problem, and we will have to evaluate which are the pros and the cons of the different strategic alternatives in order to try to eliminate them, in order to try to polish the strategic alternative, to modify them so that the pros can be promoted and the cons can be eliminated or reduced. Okay, so let's get into this process. So first of all, strategic suitability. What do we mean by suitability? Well, if the strategy fits the strategic analysis of the firm, if it fulfills the mission, the vision, and the goals, if it uses the opportunities, profits from the opportunities, and uses the strengths, and if it faces the threats and protects the company from its weaknesses. Okay, it's so much and so less that, considering what we have done in Strategic Management 1 about the strategic analysis, if the strategy somehow is aligned with the strategic analysis we carried out. There are two main ways to analyze this. There are theoretical models and there's the empirical evidence. What do we mean by theoretical models? Okay, do you remember what we studied in lesson 5 about these entry methods to other countries, strategies to enter other countries? We said, okay, exportation. Exportation is especially adequate for newbies, companies which haven't got many resources and capabilities, Okay, this is theoretical models. How theoretically different strategic alternatives fit with the situation, with the internal and external context of the firm. If our company is, for instance, facing important political risk, external, and has got an exceeding production capability, internal, okay, putting them both together, maybe exportation is a good alternative. All the models we have studied, the 5 forces model, the value chain model, the BCG matrix, all of this are theoretical models. Okay, what else? Empirical evidence. Empirical evidence is based on statistical models which link different internal and external variables with the performance of the firm. I mean, imagine that we had a database about what companies have done in different circumstances and the results they have had. If we analyze all these database, normally we would have a panel of data, okay? We analyze this panel and we discover that some variables are more related with success with profitability than some others. This is empirical evidence, okay? And how do we use this empirical evidence? Well, there are some statistical databases. I am going to get a bit deeper into this, okay? And there are also some academic studies, sorry. All the research we carry out that along this research, we discovered that, for instance, imagine that profitability is more associated with related diversification or unrelated diversification, Okay, these are our academic studies. This strategic suitability is critically related with the concept of strategic fit. What's the meaning of this? If the strategic fit means that the strategy fits with the internal and external context of the company. Okay, if the strategy is adequate for the internal and the external analysis. For instance, in a major industry, is it especially suitable, let's say, aligning with some other companies to reinvent the standard? Normally not. Okay, this is more aligned with, well, decline if we want to restart the industry, or especially introduction. Okay, especially introduction. It's normally used in introduction. If we use it in decline, it's in order to restart an introduction. Okay, so that's it. So strategic fit is the fit between the internal and external context of a company, okay, and its strategy. That's called strategic fit. Well, I said empirical evidence, and I told you about some databases. These are two examples, okay? Well, first of all, PIMS, Profit Impact of Market Strategy. This database was originally designed or created more empowered by General Electric managers. They wanted to know which were the drivers of the profitability of the different strategic business units. Well, in fact, afterwards the database got released from General Electric. Now it's an independent database, okay, and it puts together more than 25,000 years of complete statistic information at the SBU level of different companies, okay? So it analyzes which are the internal and external variables which condition the success, the profitability of the companies. Maybe you are wondering why companies supply information to create this database. Well, they are granted reports. They are granted different reports, okay? This database includes more than 50 variables, and the model explains more than 70% of the differences in profitability, which is much to say. I mean, imagine that you are able, even if with 50 variables, to explain 70% of the profitability of a company. That's great. Okay, here in Spain we have got our own database. It's called Encuesta sobre Estrategias Empresariales. It is carried out by Fundación SEPI, and it gathers data about manufacturing firms, not any firm, manufacturing firms with more than 10 workers, but it's especially focused on firms with more than 200 workers. Okay. It includes information about many internal and external variables about the most important decisions of companies, M&As, market development, technologies, Okay, so this is about suitability. Now it comes feasibility. Now we have got suitable strategies that suit the internal and external context. Now, are they feasible? What do we mean by feasible? Is this strategic alternative really possible for the firm? Could we really implement it? Well, this depends on three things. First of all, resources and capabilities availability. If we have got the resources and the capabilities needed to put it into practice. If no, well, is it possible to get them? If it's not possible to get them and we haven't got them, this strategy is not feasible. We cannot do it. Okay, it's not doable, we could say. Okay, then the organizational fit. Organizational fit means that the organizational structure, the leadership, the culture have to fit the strategy. If they don't, in fact, maybe we can try to change them. But if there are many things to be changed, it will be more difficult to put that strategy into practice. It's not that the strategy is not feasible, but it's more complicated. Finally, the timing. Do we have the time we need in order to put a strategy into practice? Okay. And have we got the adequate timing, the adequate pace in order? This second part is critically related with a concept which is the organizational fit. The organizational fit, well, if you remember, the strategic fit was the fit between the strategy and the context. Okay, the organizational fit is the fit between the organization and the strategy. The organization saying the leadership, the culture, the structure. Okay. Well, imagine that we have got strategies which are suitable, feasible. Okay, what comes after? Acceptable. Acceptable for whom? Acceptable for the stakeholders, especially for the critical and determinant ones. If stakeholders latent, it's not so much important for the strategy. Okay, well, acceptable for the stakeholders in which terms? First of all, for the shareholders in terms of value creation. Value creation, maximizing the value of shareholder funds in the long run, this is the main goal of the firm. Okay, so they have to be acceptable in that terms. Imagine that we are considering strategies for organizations which are not economic. I mean, which goal is not value creation. Imagine that we are working for an NGO and the goal is eliminating malaria, for instance, and this is not value creation. Okay, well, there are some techniques which replace value creation as the goal. Some of them, for instance, are called cost-benefit analysis. Okay, we can use this cost-benefit analysis instead. Second, acceptable in terms of financial risk. Financial risk of the strategy itself and the financial risk that the company will have to face in order to put the strategy into practice. Imagine that the company has to get severely indebted in order to put a new strategy into practice. Maybe the strategy itself hasn't got an important financial risk, but the strategy is putting the whole company at an important financial risk. Finally, we have got stakeholders analysis, political risk. Political risk in order, we mean internal politics, okay? Strategy has to be acceptable for all the critical stakeholders. If not, as long as they are critical, they will block the strategy. Okay. Obviously, CSR is gaining importance. Why? Well, because society is starting to be a more critical stakeholder for any company. Well, and this is the first part of lesson 6.